As a reminder, if everyone could please mute yourselves. Good morning. Good afternoon. This is a hearing before the Boston Cannabis Board. Today is Wednesday, September 16th, 2020. Before we go over some housekeeping matters regarding today's hearing, I'm going to introduce Kathleen Joyce, the chairwoman of the board.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Leslie. And I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for joining us here today. And a special thank you to my staff, Executive Secretary Leslie Delaney Hawkins, and the Cannabis Project Manager, Jasmine Wynn, who's helped us in the last week organize all the materials that have come in leading up to last week's hearing and that have been supplemented since last week's hearing. And I'd also like to thank my fellow commissioners that are here today, Commissioner Lisa Holmes, Commissioner Darlene Lombos, Commissioner John Smith, Commissioner Alejandro Sanquian. We have all put hours of work into your applications, reviewing them and considering them. So I appreciate all of your time.
Thank you, Chairwoman Joyce. Today's hearing is being conducted pursuant to temporary amendments to the open meeting law. That is what allows us to meet virtually. This hearing will be recorded and will be posted on the city's website. Well, this hearing is open to the public, and we are very happy to see so many individuals in attendance and observing. There will be no additional testimony taken at today's hearing. As a reminder, the role of the Boston Cannabis Board is to determine the time, place, and manner. The Boston Cannabis Board is the citing authority for cannabis establishments within the city of Boston. Following the grant of any license by the Boston Cannabis Board, the applicant subsequently must obtain the requisite zoning relief and the approval of the Cannabis Control Commission at the state level. There's an important distinction between the grant of a license and the issuance of a license. The grant of a license by this board allows the applicant to continue forward in the process. The issuance of the license is what occurs administratively at the end of the process when all other necessary approvals are obtained. This board does not execute host community agreements, nor does it negotiate them. However, all discussions and conditions placed on any granting of a license by this board are incorporated into the host community agreement. And I think I speak on behalf of everyone involved when I say that we should all be very pleased with the fact that the board granted 2 licenses at its first hearing, and those applicants have already executed host community agreements with Corporation Counsel. It's important to note that we are not comparing applications today. The board will evaluate each application on its own individual merits. Legally, there is a minimum requirement of 52 retail cannabis establishments that must be cited within the city of Boston. The board's role is to cite these establishments, and the legal standard is that the board cannot be unduly impracticable. And with that, I will begin with the first item on the agenda. When I call the agenda item, each commissioner will have the opportunity to make comments, beginning with the chairwoman. No vote will be taken until each commissioner has had the opportunity to make comments, at which time I will return to the chair and we will discuss any potential motions. The first item on the agenda is HVV Massachusetts, Inc., the holder of a non-operational medical cannabis dispensary license, has applied for a recreational cannabis retail dispensary license to be co-located at 220 McClellan Highway in East Boston. The applicant is a non-equity applicant. Chairwoman Joyce?
Thank you, Leslie. I'm just going to go over my notes on this application based off the evaluation criteria and point out a couple of things that are important to me. This applicant is already operating in Gloucester and intends to be open by the end of 2020. I was impressed with the diversity inclusion plan that include more than just goals, but also measures for the inclusion and diversity. I would ask, should a license be granted to this applicant, that the applicant share updates to the board on these metrics and what they've done to the community. They've addressed their commitments to the community. They plan on engaging with leaders. My concern is the location. While it is a blessing, it can also be a burden. A blessing in the sense that it's very industry heavy. It's in a manufacturing district, a commercial industrial area. I am still concerned about its location to the airport. And should this application be granted, I would expect that the the operator would use additional measures to look for backup identification should there be international IDs used to purchase or to enter their establishment. They have plenty of parking, and they have a good plan for delivery and pickup. And so they meet each of the evaluation criteria for me.
Commissioner Lombos?
Joyce, I agree with many of your summarization of the application. I appreciate you doing that. I would like to see if this operator was also would be getting a license if we granted them. In terms of the D&I thought it was a good plan. I agree with you. I would like to see, it's not clear whether any of those, it was good research and good links and all of those things, not clear who they've talked to, what kind of relationships they have. So clearly we will want to make sure that we take a look and see what those relationships end up being, given that it's a lot of links and a lot of research and unclarity to me whether those relationships can be made and exist. And I would have liked to see a little bit more higher goals on employment. But like you said, I agree with the overall summary of the application, Chairwoman. Thank you.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes, thank you so much. I was happy to receive from Happy Valley the additional information, and that they're going to be working with the East Boston Ecumenical Community and East Boston Main Streets in terms of the immigrant hires. The concern I share with our chairperson is just a location in terms of being near to the airport and having international folks coming in and sort of using their facilities, but everything else they scored pretty high on. And thank you.
Commissioner St-Gian?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I second the thoughts of my fellow commissioners. It scored very high across the board, and I also appreciated the supplemental information about foreign-born hires. It's an extremely important factor, particularly within East Boston, which has such a large foreign-born application. But other than the airport concern and additional security around the IDs, I thought this was a very favorable application.
Thank you. Commissioner Holmes?
I echo the sentiments of my fellow commissioners. I also appreciated their follow-up from Commissioner St-Gian asking about the specific hiring for immigrant populations. And I thought that their supplement was impressive on how they looked at that, and the fact that they actually admitted that they hadn't even thought that that was even a consideration, and that the acceptance of them realizing that that was something that they had to look into strongly. And the same thing, the airport, but they seem to be very, very astute and alert about their location and making sure that they adhere to some really strong safety practices. So strong application, and I echo the sentiments of everyone else.
Thank you. Chairwoman Joyce?
I'd like to make a motion to grant this license to Happy Valley with the condition that they update the board on an annual basis on their diversity, inclusion, and employment plan.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Holmes seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And none opposed. Granted with a condition that the licensee update the board on an annual basis regarding its diversity and inclusion plan. The second item is EVG Farms Group LLC has applied for a recreational cannabis retail dispensary license to be exercised at 883 Hyde Park Avenue in Hyde Park. The applicant is an equity applicant. Before we begin the discussion by the board, I just want to note that, as everyone is aware, there are two applicants on this agenda, this being the first, which would create a half-mile buffer zone. The board schedules the items before it based on the date when the applicant began this process, when it completed this process, and of course, adhering to the 1-to-1 ratio. Therefore, there is no buffer zone conflict to consider when considering this specific applicant. Chairwoman Joyce?
Thank you. And I want to thank the applicant for their patience as I tried to wrap my head around their participation in the accelerated program. This is a new industry, you know, for everyone and for the board members here. So we're trying to understand what the landscape is locally and nationally. This is another strong application. The applicants show a strong commitment to their community. They have a very strong diversity and inclusion and a very strong employment plan. I do want to note the quality of life issues due to this location being in a highly residential area. And the comments of Ms. Carlson and her grandson were not lost on me. There are some traffic and logistical issues due to its location, but there is solid community support. I like that it's locally owned. I did have questions at the beginning about what locally owned meant in this situation because of their relationship with the National Accelerator Program, but I'm satisfied with the explanation that they gave me. And should this license be granted, I would ask that the applicant continue to work with the neighbors on those quality of life issues. In the application, it stated that they will be monitoring the driveway. I think you have a special situation here with an abutter that her livelihood and she lives there as well. I would ask that it go beyond monitoring, perhaps actually having a security officer out there to make sure that the quality of her life is not negatively impacted by your business.
Thank you. Commissioner Lombos? Oh, we cannot hear you.
And want to just point out,
Commissioner Lombos, I think we just lost your audio.
sorry,
We can hear you now.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I was just saying that, again, lovely summary from our chairwoman. I agree with, want to make sure.
Lombos, we've lost your audio again. But we'll return to Commissioner Lombos. Commissioner Smith?
Thank you. And again, I agree with our chairwoman. Also, I did a lot of reading about Forefront in terms of them being in the Catalyst program. It's an incubator program. Forefront is a pretty big corporation. Notice that, you know, in terms of, at least from what I saw on their website, there's not any sort of diversity there in terms of their leadership and board members. Pretty big corporation, so a little bit concerned about the people who are sort of backing them in terms of their financing and development. So, but strong program in the community, and that's my comment.
Thank you. Commissioner Sankian?
Thank you, everyone. Across the board, this application scored very high in each of the areas. Again, you know, really this commitment to the board and to the city on our equity applicants and those that have been negatively impacted by the war on drugs is particularly important to me. So I highly value this applicant, the support that they've been given in the community. The only place that I also felt the applicant would have to continue to work is with the neighbors and the quality of life, given the type of resident it is. And also it was unclear how they were going to be ADA accessible in terms of their parking. So I just wanted to make sure that that was taken care of, but across the board received high marks on all the areas. Thank you.
Commissioner Holmes?
I was impressed with them, and I thank them for sending in the addendum on the security plan. Again, I echo the same sentiment as our chairwoman because of the effect that this will have on the neighbors and the abutters in the tight residential area. that they really work closely with the community, with the Hyde Park Neighborhood Association, to ensure that the quality of life for those neighbors that abut them on Hyde Park Ave isn't disrupted by their business. But other than that, I strongly, very high marks across the board, like the fact that local people in their neighborhood, they live there and they're going to have their business there. And I just hope that they will continue to work with their neighbors to be a pleasant business in that neighborhood.
Thank you. And Commissioner Lombos was having a technical difficulty and she was dialing in with her phone.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Sorry you can't see me. I was just saying, totally agree with our chairwoman and all of the other commissioners. This is exactly the kind of applicant we want to see. Such care in the way in which the application was done. Again, I would really love to highlight just the ability to think about every piece of the D&I and incorporate it in every part of the application. And the care that they did. So I just want to, again, such a great job on that, and echo I have confidence that given that you live in the neighborhood, you're from the neighborhood, that you'll be working with the neighbors there in dealing with some of the issues that they brought up. So again, thanks again, and great application.
Good. Even though we can't see you, Commissioner, we can hear you perfectly clear. Chairwoman Joy?
Excellent.
Leslie, did you just call on me to make a motion? Okay. I make a motion to grant this license to EVG LLC, and I ask that they forward a copy of their lease once it's executed, and that they continue to work with the neighbors.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It is passed unanimously. We will request that the applicant forward a copy of its lease once executed, and will continue working with the neighbors. Item 3, New England Cannabis Corporation has applied for a recreational cannabis retail dispensary license to be exercised at 204 North Beacon Street in Allston, Brighton. The applicant is a non-equity applicant. Commissioner Joyce?
Sure. This was a solid application and a solid presentation. I would like to point out that there was significant and a large amount of opposition to this as well, neighborhood opposition. And I do hear and appreciate the concerns of the residents, for sure. These are real serious concerns, being that it's located next to a Dunkin' Donuts parking lot where kids congregate. I want to point out that the prior law had language about areas where children are likely to congregate, and the current law and the zoning codes specifically amended that to restrict these to proximities to school. We need to cite these businesses. The follow-up letter from the applicant addressed some of the concerns I brought up in the initial hearing, as far as what will they do to address lines outside, especially this has been identified as an area where kids do congregate and families do on the weekends. And they went into great detail to say that the waiting area will have 67 people and the retail sales area will have 20. I think it addressed those concerns. And I appreciated the fact that they pointed out to me that the hours of operation reflect the fact that they know the busy times in this area for that Dunkin' Donuts parking lots would be rush hour. They don't even plan to open up before 10 a.m. I think they've gone to great lengths to address the concerns of the community for the last couple of years. And they've even decided to have a dedicated security personnel outside. The diversity inclusion plan can't be, we can't overstate how important that is to our board. And I think the diversity and inclusion plan could go beyond the goals. It seems very aspirational. Should this be granted, I would ask the applicant to submit an annual update to us to show us how they've actually put those goals into place. They've addressed every concern that was raised in a responsible way. And they did their homework on the transportation and the traffic there. And they even addressed some of the large crowds that might gather at certain times of the week or certain times of the year. I think all in all, it's a a very thoughtful application and a responsible application.
Thank you. Commissioner Lombos?
Thank you again, Chairwoman, for that great summary. Just to echo some of those things, we have a scorecard that we're using as a guide and for each of the applications. And I just want to point out that each of the sections are very important and are weighted based on what we're seeing in the plans, and that we do want people to understand who are applying that those are the kinds of things that we're looking at, and that we'll be looking for in our annual kind of updates as companies renew their licenses. So this did score very high on the D&I for me as well. Very strong relationships with Verdant and MCEC. I liked seeing that in the application. There were some good employment high goals and good metrics. There was the D&I committee. So those two in and of itself with D&I and employment, they were really high scores. I am a little torn given the amount of opposition there was in the neighborhood. And they did receive a low score for me on the community support, given the opposition. But again, those are also just part of the application. I just want to make that clear. And that we are taking that into consideration for sure. But again, the rest of the application was certainly a strong one. And again, D&I and employment and location are weighted. And I would, again, if we do grant this license, to really think about how we can, again, continue to work with this company to work with the neighbors. I think that that's going to be a real show of trust in continuing to build those relationships and address those issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Smith?
Thank you. I echo that. I think Commissioner Lombos, in terms of the D&I and the employment, they scored really high, but the community concern regarding young people congregating and the lack of support from the Brighton Alston Improvement. So you did not score, they didn't score really high on that. They talked about a customer code of conduct, and I was thinking about how do you enforce that in terms of knowing, if you know that people, or maybe you don't, I think it's impossible for everybody to know if people are buying and distributing to young people right outside, of the premises. People are buying for other people, so thought about that. But other than that, they scored pretty high. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner St. Gian?
Yeah, I want to mirror my fellow commissioners. I agree. In my calculations, they scored high as well. I would echo the chairwoman's point about the importance of reporting numbers because they are very aspirational, and the 75% does include sort of every group, and so it'd be great to see how that breaks down year to year. I also concerned about and read through the opposition significantly, and but I also believe as a new and growing industry that it's going to be impossible to find perfect places for each of these areas, and that it is important that these areas that these industries, as they open up, are able to work with their neighbors, work with their concerns, and hopefully when they report back for renewal can show significant progress in that relationship.
Commissioner Holmes?
I echo everyone's sentiments. My biggest concern, like everybody else's, was the lack of community support, and I clearly understand that. I would just ask that NEC would go a step further and maybe have a dedicated security guard for that parking area, because although they note the high traffic times, which they say they're not going to be open and they're going to close at certain times, midday when the schools get out and the teenagers and the young people are congregating there is also going to be a big factor. So other than that, they scored very well with me. That's my major concern, is that, in the afternoon hours, they're going to have young people congregating there. And as Commissioner Smith stated, and Commissioner Sakian, how do we know that people aren't passing things off outside? So I would just ask that they work with us and work with the neighborhood to ensure that that's not happening by maybe having a dedicated person assigned to outside.
Thank you. Chairwoman Joyce?
Thank you. Thank you, commissioners. I appreciate your feedback and your input. I make a motion to grant this license to NECC, and I'm going to add on to this as a condition that they have a dedicated security personnel outside during these busy times, and that they continue to work with the neighborhood association and update the board on those conversations.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
License is granted with a condition that there is dedicated security personnel during peak hours. Item 4, Massachusetts Citizens for Social Equity LLC has applied for a recreational cannabis retail dispensary license to be exercised at 3997 Washington Street in Roslindale. The applicant is an equity applicant. Chairwoman Joyce?
Thank you. And I just want to add, before I get into my evaluation, that we did receive support from the Office of Neighborhood Services. They rescinded their opposition and supported the application. This was another strong application. They scored strong. They scored very high in the 5 categories for me. I can't look past the fact that this is also in a very residential area, and that raises some quality of life issues for me as chair of the board. Being in that neighborhood, I'm also interested to see how their security plan works out. Unlike some of the other applications, they are outsourcing the security, so I want to make sure that the training is at a certain level where the applicant and the operator and the security personnel are on the same page. I think you need to continue to work with the neighborhood and get their input about where the door is going to be and how it's going to impact the neighbors.
Thank you. Commissioner Lombos?
Thank you again, Chairwoman, for the summary. It is a very strong application, scored very high on all categories for me as well. I want to stress again, I think I said this at the last meeting, with with the equity applications in particular, when they're scoring very high and we want to see them succeed, I really want to find ways to support and make sure that they're successful. So anything that we can do on the board level, but also supporting all of our staff over at the as they provide technical assistance and all of that. That is really important because the equity applicants have such strong applications and are from the community and are exactly the kind of applicants we want to see. We also want to make sure that we're supporting them in being successful. So I just wanted to make that comment and reiterate that, and anything we can do on the board level to support that would be great.
Thank you. Commissioner Smith?
Thank you. Other than the physical, in terms of the information on the building that Chairwoman alluded to, strong application. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner St. Gian?
I agree. As I mentioned in the last hearing for this applicant, I think this is exactly the type of applicant that we want to see, and I'm proud to be in a city and on a board that has such a strong commitment to equity, and this applicant scored high across the board. And I will also echo Commissioner Lambos's concern that we continue to support these applicants as they roll out their businesses, as it's hugely important to that they are successful. So very strong application across the board.
Thank you. Commissioner Holmes?
I echo Chairwoman Joyce with the concerns about the lack of community support and the density of the neighborhood. And I support the application. Every other factor of their application is strong, but they really are going to have to work to win over the neighborhood and to assure that, again, the quality of life isn't disturbed, by their business. But other than that, strong application, and I am very supportive and impressed with the business savvy of these young guys. I love it.
Thank you. And before we move to a motion, I will note that as certified equity applicants, that does allow access to technical assistance and the assistance of the fund also created by the ordinance. And we will be working with Attorney Chayla White, the Office of Economic Development, and their team to connect them to those resources. Chairwoman Joyce,
I make a motion to grant this license.
do we have a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
This license is granted. Item 5, Beacon Compassion, Inc. has applied for a medical cannabis dispensary license to be exercised at 1524 VFW Parkway in West Roxbury. The applicant is a non-equity applicant. Chairwoman Joyce?
Thanks, Leslie. This application scored high for me with the location and the parking and in the other categories as well. I don't have much to add. It's a medical application, which is the first one we've had on the agenda today. I defer my time to my other commissioners.
Thank you. Commissioner Lombos?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Yeah, I also scored high on most of the pieces. I do want to point out that the D&I and employment were not as strong. I feel like there would be, the goals were a little low for some of the, especially the area that they're wanting to operate in. I'd like to see some higher goals. I think it's solid, though. I do like the Diversity Equity Committee. That's important. And so that I would just ask, if we do grant this license, that we make sure that we're in constant communication with that Diversity Equity Committee, and that we're supporting them in meeting these goals and making sure that they have some metrics in both employment and D&I.
Thank you. Commissioner Smith?
Thank you. Same as Commissioner Lombos, in terms of the stronger metrics around D&I. But other than that, I thought they were a good application. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner St. Gian?
I agree. I thought across the board, a very strong application. I know that area well. So I think for me, the security and the parking is really scored high. I would agree, and I mentioned last week, I pressed them a little bit on the employment goals. I appreciate that it is a driving only, which may limit some of it, but I frequent those establishments across, the Providence Highway, because I live right there, and a lot of the establishments have many people of color working in them. So I think they shouldn't worry too much that as an obstacle, because I do think that they would, if they set their goals higher, they would be able to meet them with concerted effort. So, but overall, very strong application.
Thank you. Commissioner Holmes?
My sentiments are exactly as Commissioner St. Gian and Commissioner Lombos, that they work just a little bit stronger on their employment of citizens outside of West Roxbury. I know we try to get the community, but as Commissioner St. Gian pointed out last week, that 70% of the employment there would not be beneficial to people of color or people outside the neighborhood. So maybe, just to tweak that a little bit, just to ensure that everybody gets a fair bite at the apple. But other than that, the location is great, security. Other than that, everything is fine. Strong application.
Thank you. Chairwoman Joyce, do you have a motion?
Motion to grant this license, and I ask that the applicant continue to update the board on the diversity and employment plan.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Application is granted, and the applicant will be a request will be made of the applicant to continually update the board on its diversity and inclusion plan, in addition to the required annual update should a license be issued. Item 6, New Dia LLC has applied for a recreational cannabis retail dispensary license to be exercised at 48 to 62 Brookline Avenue in the Fenway. The applicant is an equity applicant. Commissioner Joyce, Chairwoman Joyce.
Thanks. Leslie, before I go into my evaluation, could you remind everyone about the buffer zone and how it applies to this application?
Yes, I can. Thank you. So this applicant is within a half-mile of another applicant who has executed a host community agreement with the city of Boston. This occurred before this board was established. In terms of the buffer zone the buffer zone requirement, that is in the zoning code. So that requires a variance in order to resolve any buffer zone issue. When this board was discussing and drafting its rules and regulations, it was important that there be language in the rules and regulations that allowed for the resolution of a buffer zone conflict, given the fact that the minimum number of retail establishments that legally must be cited within the city of Boston is 52, means that it would legally be impossible to cite that number while adhering to a half-mile buffer zone. And that is why the board voted to incorporate into its rules and regulations a higher standard, which is reflective of the legal standard that the Zoning Board of Appeals would apply to any variance required to resolve the buffer zone ordinance. So this applicant was asked to submit written correspondence detailing why, in addition to this being an appropriate time, place, and manner, it also meets that stricter level of scrutiny to be applied by the board today.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to jump into that part of my review and criteria. This is an equity applicant. I'm relying on Attorney Chayla White's certification of this applicant in that the applicant meets the City of Boston's equity certification. Because of the zoning, the buffer zone, we then have to look to how this heightened scrutiny applies to this application. The other parts of the application I'm not taking issue with right now, but I'd like to raise the fact that, and I raised it at the hearing, I do have real concerns with the location. A lot of those concerns were addressed at a very high level in the application, but I think what I need as chair of this board is more details as far as how are they going to address game days. This is, the Fenway Park isn't just an abutter, and I know you don't need to get the support of all your abutters. However, it's a tourist attraction. It's also a local attraction. And on game days, like families and children swarm the area, and also special events happen, many days of the year. My concerns aren't with necessarily the application on its own. It's proximity to this venue. So, and it's Fenway Park is a gathering space. It's also in a neighborhood. So I would ask for some, I'm concerned with the security and operations plan as it currently is. Other than that, I think the application is strong. I think that they should we grant this, meet the additional requirements of the buffer zone.
Thank you. Commissioner Lamba?
Thanks, Leslie. Thank you, Chairwoman Joyce. I thought this was a very strong application, scored very high on employment and D&I. One of the strongest, I think, equity and inclusion, diversity and inclusion plans. Again, these are all aspirational, and I really would like to find ways to support them in meeting these goals. I think that there was to me, there's every applicant has to have a D&I, an employment plan, and that's what this board is for. And some applicants have been doing that well, and some applicants haven't. And then some applicants are doing an additional fund or support for community groups around the area, which I really much appreciate. And the fact that this had both a strong D&I and employment plan, and with an aspiration to commit funds to surrounding neighborhood groups, I thought was very strong. I know we're not supposed to compare applications, but there have been applications that have given are committed to giving donations, but then don't have a strong D&I or employment plan. So for me, having a strong D&I and employment plan, providing good jobs, career pathways for people who have been impacted by the war on drugs, is far more important than the philanthropic contributions that some companies have decided to concentrate on. So this has both. It's a strong application. I do share some concerns with Chairwoman Joyce, but I do feel like this is the kind of application we want to support and give them a chance.
Thank you. Commissioner Smith?
Thank you. So I know there was a long discussion when we did last week about are you on Brookline Ave, Lansdowne Street, entrance, proximity to Fenway, and people congregating there, which could be offset in a sense from your display, the very large waiting room that you have. So overall, pretty strong. Some concerns about the location and making sure that it's secure and who gets access to it. But other than that, it was pretty strong. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner St. Guillen?
This scored high across the board for me as well, and I do think, I understand the concerns of security, and it'd be hugely important that we have really strong guidelines on what that looks like. I do think that area, being the area that it is, with the many bars and so forth, that already those institutions already have to implement very, very strong guidelines. So I think it is that falls in line with what liquor establishments, bars, and restaurants have to abide by. And so I trust that they'll be able to implement those security guidelines. So and across the board, a very strong application.
Thank you. Commissioner Holmes?
Just as everyone else stated, my only concern is the location and the proximity to the park, and not only on game days, but all the local establishments along Lansdowne Street and along Brookline Ave. So my only concern is that, but the factor that kind of takes away some of that is the large queuing area, which I think is very important. So again, as long as, we can make sure that we adhere to that, and, that we don't have a lot of traffic, flowing from the bar downstairs up to the dispensary upstairs, and that we keep that separate, because that can be a big concern too. People decide they're downstairs and they want to go upstairs. So I would like to be able to, continue to work with you to find out how you're going to prevent. Some of it's going to be impossible, but you got to have a plan to ensure that those things don't happen on a regular basis, because it's going to happen. So you're going to have a plan on how to handle it and how to dissuade that. Other than that, I think everything about your application is great.
Thank you. Chairwoman Joyce, do you have a motion?
Thank you. Excuse me. I just want to address again that this is a solid application. Because it requires a buffer zone variance, we do have this elevated level of additional requirements we need to meet. And because this is a uniquely situated place next to this attraction, this Fenway Park, I would like to make a motion to defer this application until our October voting meeting for the reasons that Commissioner Holmes has outlined. She knows personally and professionally just what these could be and what would be required of this applicant to hit all those points for us. We want to be able, being an equity applicant, we will help you. I just want to see something more robust as far as the security and operations plan. I think as a board, we would be remiss to wait until that got worked out after the fact. But my motion, it would be to defer it for 30 days or until the October voting meeting, Leslie, like we did at the August meeting.
Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? This one-
I just have a question. Is this just in terms of the deferment? Does this could we do a conditional one just like we? It's different than a conditional license. I just wanted clarification on some other ones where we had some questions. Is this more of a concern, Chairwoman Joyce, just in terms of the transportation or the security issues?
No, my only concern really is these security and operations plan. And I think there could be a little bit more work in that area.
And so So could we grant a conditional license and then get that, or that the deferring is what we should be doing? I'm just trying, this is all
Leslie?
new too, in terms of
No,
the
I know.
difference between the conditional
I,
and deferment.
I think in this instance, where it's similar, not that it's a deficient plan, but where similarly to the item we have on the old and new portion of the agenda, there's concrete information and additional discussions that we would like to see with such a large, the board would like to see with such a large and significant direct abutter. The more appropriate action would be to defer until the October voting meeting to allow them to make a good faith effort to work with finalizing those plans.
Great, thanks for the clarification. No opposition, just wanted to clarify that they'll be coming up in October then.
Yes.
Great, so this will be deferred until the October voting agenda to allow them to continue discussions and finalize their security and operations plans. Item 7, Sons Mass Inc. has applied for a co-located recreational cannabis retail dispensary, medical dispensary, and a manufacturing license to be exercised at 931 Hyde Park Avenue in Hyde Park. The applicant is a non-equity applicant. As we discussed with the last application, as the board voted to grant a license to EVG Farms Group LLC, which is within a half-mile of the of this application, the additional elevated standard must be applied to the board's evaluation of this applicant as well. I've also received questions from multiple members of the board regarding what can be considered in terms of this applicant when determining whether to grant or not grant a license. I've also consulted with Corporation Counsel on this point. The board must adhere to both the ordinance and its legal authority as the citing authority for the time, place, and manner. The character and fitness is always a consideration that is woven throughout the criteria established in the ordinance. The role of background checks and looking into alleged or validated business activities in this state or other states is the role of the Cannabis Control Commission. As such, concerns that are specific to business operations in other states legally cannot be the reason for the denial or rejection of an application. And I'm happy to answer any questions regarding that. And I'll move to Chairwoman Joyce. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner.
Yeah, I have a question. In terms of voting, are the only options to approve or oppose?
So it is to grant, obviously to defer, to grant or to reject without prejudice, which allows the applicant to reapply at any time, but also puts the applicant back at the, at the bottom of the queue, or to reject with prejudice, which means the applicant cannot apply for 1 year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Chairwoman Joyce?
Thanks. And so since we voted to grant the second application, we now have a buffer zone issue before us.
Correct.
Okay. This application, I'm aware of its location and proximity to the other Hyde Park applicant. I appreciate what that could mean to the neighborhood. To me, this is a different concept. It's manufacturing and medical as well as retail, whereas again, we're not supposed to be comparing, but I think it's distinct and different from the other Hyde Park applicant who is offering more of a local flavor to his business model. I think that this would still, it would not negatively impact the neighborhood because they have a great plan in place in its great location as far as safety and security and transportation. And so I'm looking at it through the licensing lens as far as what it offers the community.
Thank you. Commissioner Lambos?
Yeah, I really had to rely heavily on this scorecard, which was so helpful in terms of looking at the different criteria, partly because, again, this had strong opposition and so scored very low on the community support part for my scoring. And also wasn't very high actually on D&I and employment. I think that there were certainly some hiring goals and some, but also just not clear about metrics. I did like at D&I that there was a local person that has respect in the community that they were trying to work with. But again, you know, not as strong, I think, in the both D&I and employment as I would have liked to see, and then also very low on the community support. So regardless of whether or not we can legally look at what the issues were in other states, and that's up to the state to do, which I'm assuming they will look at very carefully, that even in my scorecard, they scored very low on many of the other parts of the application.
Thank you. Commissioner Smith?
Thank you. So just thinking about, they are very different in terms of the dispensary EVG, but thinking about their goals around, you know, MBE and equity, using equity vendors, and also, you know, talking about working with the city, where I'm still concerned that even at the city, the contracts are basically less than 5% of contract money goes to minority-owned firms. Thinking about when they talked about if it's less than 30%, they're going to partner with local charities and nonprofits in terms of their employment and all that. So wondering about their aspirational goals and if they can really hit those metrics that they're talking about. And then there was a lot of pushback in terms of them being allowed to open there. So that was part of, like, in terms of their scores, the lowest for me. But everything else I thought was solid. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner St. Gian?
Thank you. So I concur with Commissioner Lambos and my other commissioners. Looking purely at the scorecard, very low marks in D&I and employment, particularly looking at compensation, starting up to $15 an hour was the language that was used within the application. I thought that was much lower than other areas, particularly given their size and scope and the type of profit that they would bring in. For me, this would be one that I would have to do a deferment as well, or I couldn't support the application as is.
Thank you. Commissioner Holmes?
I agree with Commissioner St. Gian 100%. There was so many aspects of this application that did not sit well with me. The fact the $15 an hour wage was the lowest of most of the companies that we've heard from. I know we're not supposed to compare, but and I agree, because of the fact they're such a large company that they should be able to offer more to employees. I'm very concerned with the manufacturing aspect of this business in that area, and the combination of a local use room, you know, in a dispensary. I don't quite get that, and that just could be me. And some of the other factors that we can't consider here, you know, their business practices. So I'm with Commissioner St. Gian. I'd have to really defer this.
Thank you. Chairwoman Joyce?
Thank you, and thank you to my fellow commissioners. I appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into this. I'm going to follow up on Commissioner St. Gian's suggestion and make a motion to defer this vote until the next voting meeting.
Do I have a second?
I have a question about that. Is the deferment because we need more information, or we want them to get a second crack at it, at the application, or because I would vote to reject it at this point. So I'm not sure what, you know, as opposed to the other one when we're saying we want to work with them on the security plan. This is a little bit different to me. I'm not sure how much we want to work with them on every single aspect of their application.
Yeah.
So
I
the-
agree with that.
I agree with that too. Yeah.
So a deferral would be to, just as you said, Commissioner Lombos, to ask for more information, a motion to reject without prejudice would be just that, to reject the application and let them reapply again, going to the bottom of the queue.
Okay, I'm going to make a motion again to defer until next month to allow them to supplement. And at that point, we can reevaluate with the supplemental materials. And then we can make a further motion at that point to either approve or to reject. Would you guys be comfortable with that motion?
Is there a second to that motion? Seeing no second, is there a different motion?
I would submit a motion to reject the application.
Is that a motion to reject with prejudice or without?
With prejudice means, remind me what that means?
No worries, they couldn't reapply for 1 year.
Oh, they could, yeah, I think that if we reject it, they should be able to be in a year if they want to reapply. Yeah, I'm not saying don't ever apply again. I'm saying this application is not, there's too much in it that would need to be supplemented, in my opinion, to then do a deferment. So I'm suggesting we reject.
So motion to reject, but without prejudice, which allows them to come back, but they begin at the bottom of the queue.
Okay.
Yes.
Is there a second for that motion?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
The motion carries. This application is rejected without prejudice, with Chairwoman Joyce voting to oppose. The next item is item 8. Low Key LLC has applied for a recreational cannabis retail dispensary license to be exercised at 571 Washington Street in Dorchester. The applicant is an equity applicant. Chairwoman Joyce?
This was a solid application. I don't have anything to point out as far as inadequacies. The application clearly addressed the evaluation criteria, both with goals and tactics and opportunities for growth within the company. And the applicant appears to be willing to work very hard with the community to be a partner. I like this application.
Thank you, Commissioner Lombos.
I agree 100% with Chairwoman Joyce on this one.
Commissioner Smith?
Very strong application, location, team in terms of how they're planning to grow. I agree very much with my other two commissioners. Very strong. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner St. Gian?
I agree with my fellow commissioners. I felt this was a really strong application. I also really appreciated the fact that they will appoint a board to make sure that their neighborhood relations stay strong, and as across the board, a fairly strong application.
Thank you. Commissioner Holmes?
Again, another strong application. Great community thoughtfulness. My only wish for them is that they continue to work with the abutters that will be affected by this. And I think if they keep the same business acumen, that they'll be able to come to some sort of good resolution with the community.
Thank you. Chairwoman Joyce, do you have a motion?
I make a motion to grant this license to Low Key LLC.
Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And opposed?
Aye.
Item 9, Dragon Vapors LLC has applied for a recreational cannabis retail dispensary license to be exercised at 354 to 358 Chestnut Hill Avenue in Alston, Brighton. The applicant is a non-equity applicant. Chairwoman Joyce?
Thank you. And again, I want to start out by saying I know we're not supposed to compare applicants, but I just want to point out a couple things that stood out to me about this applicant that distinguishes his application from others. This is a non-equity applicant. This is an entrepreneur who is trying to put to expand his current business, and I appreciate that. Because he's not an equity applicant, he hasn't been able to take advantage of some of the technical assistance and some of the other things that the city would have been able to offer, or perhaps other companies in this area in the state would have been able to offer this applicant. That being said, I think the application has a lot of room for improvement. He was not a part of any of these accelerated programs. While he was represented by an attorney, he was not represented by one of these big cannabis attorneys in the city. And I think his application, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and his plans for safety and security and queuing of the people, has a lot of room for improvement in all categories that we are evaluating it on right now. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Commissioner Lombos?
Yes, I agree with that summary. Chairwoman Joyce, again, my scorecards had very low scores on actually a lot of the categories, unfortunately. And there was some clear opposition from both the mayor's office and also from the community. So unfortunately, there's a lot of room on improvement on this.
Thank you. Commissioner Smith?
Yes, biggest concerns were the proximity to the children's pool and the skating rink, and Brighton Alston being sort of against the location, and lack of support from the mayor's office. So I would agree with my other two commissioners on that.
Commissioner St. Gian?
Yeah, again, looking at the scorecard, and I do appreciate the chairwoman's assessment at the beginning. Particularly, this is not an equity applicant, but is an applicant, a person of color, but that has not participated in any of the other benefits of other equity applicants. Did score very low for me on diversity, inclusion, and employment, and public support. So those were very strong room to grow should this applicant move forward or reapply.
Thank you. Commissioner Holmes?
The same as everyone else, scored very low. High opposition from not only the mayor's office, but the community. The location to the skating rink and the pool is very troubling. And I think a lot can be learned. There needs to be some more stuff to his application. It needs to grow, for lack of a better term. It needs some growth, so.
Thank you. Chairwoman Joyce, do you have a motion?
Sure, and again, I echo what my fellow commissioners have said since I began. So at this point, based on that feedback, I vote to reject without prejudice, so the applicant come back with a more robust application should he wish to continue at the site.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
And none opposed. So application is rejected without prejudice. Moving on to all the new business before the board.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, is that with prejudice or without?
Without.
Without, thank you.
I apologize. Thank you. The board deferred the application by Patriot Care Corp., the holder of an operational medical cannabis dispensary license, which has applied for a recreational cannabis retail license to be co-located at 21 Milk Street in downtown Boston. The applicant is a non-equity applicant. This application was deferred by the board at our August voting meeting to allow them to provide more information about their diversity and inclusion and employment plan. Supplemental documents have been submitted to all members of the board. Chairwoman Joyce?
Thank you, Leslie. And thank you to the applicant for taking the extra time to supplement the application. I was fully satisfied with the supplemental materials. It's a great example of what I think I would be looking for moving forward in other applications as far as the categories of diversity and inclusion. Should this be granted today, I would ask that the applicant continue to update the board on these efforts and to do that on a regular basis.
Thank you. Commissioner Lombos?
Thank you. I echo those comments, particularly around from the chairwoman, particularly around the D&I, much more robust and very clear about metrics and goals. So that was good. I do want to point out just the confusion around two things that I still have. One on the employment, just in terms of worker voice, there's lots of other things in terms of employment that we're looking for, or that I'm looking for in particular, but on the labor peace agreement and the confusion around that, what that is, where that's at, I think that I still have a lot of questions around that. And then I actually was confused on the later correspondence around from the Downtown Boston Business Improvement District. I can't tell whether they're in agreement. I can't tell from the correspondence at all. So I'm not quite sure what to think of that and how to score that. On the one hand, there is some agreements that was clearly stated from the BBID that I thought then Patriot Care was in agreement with, but then their letter in response didn't seem to be all in agreement. So I just want to make sure that that's clarified in some way if we choose to move forward with this application.
Yes, and my suggestion would be, and I should have mentioned this previously, once we get through initial comments, I think it's important to note of the conditions that are requested by the bid, there are some that legally I would not advise as being appropriate. Questions about who approves changes to this, but there are many that are appropriate. And so I think we can walk through those afterwards, and after we have our initial comments, and discuss those if that makes the most sense. Okay, hearing no objection, I think that's what we'll do. Commissioner Smith.
Thank you. I think by providing the additional information, they've sort of answered all the questions that we had, and I'm comfortable with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner St. Gian.
So I agree that their diversity and inclusion plan was very thoughtful. I appreciated the time that they took in developing it and presenting it, and would very much encourage regular reporting should we move forward. I too have concerns and confusion about the labor peace agreement, what's in effect, what isn't in effect, and would love to have some clarity around that, given what has seemed to be their very openness to labor peace agreements in their other businesses and in their current one, and given that this business has such a significant differential in terms of profit, I would hate to see that be the reason why they are in the labor peace agreement. Sorry, I don't know why my phone is doing that. So yeah, that remains a concern. I don't know how to, and this is so new, and I don't know how to address that, because I know that we wouldn't defer again. I'm sorry, my dog.
Commissioner Holmes.
As Commissioner Lombo said, I was just a little bit confused at the final information we got from the BID. So if we're gonna have a little discussion, that will probably clear it up.
Thank you. And Commissioner St. Gian, did you have anything else to add?
No, just that continue that does is a concern for me, because I wouldn't want that it to be related to the fact that there where there's an opportunity to actually have better labor practices, that they wouldn't do that because of the increase in profit.
And I will say, wow, I've had discussions with Corporation Counsel. I know there's been a lot of correspondence, and as the board has been, I've been receiving it, I've been sending it out to the members, so I know that there's been a lot. From a legal perspective, the board can certainly ask to be continued to be updated on those negotiations and those conversations. It cannot, however, be the reason solely to deny a license.
Okay.
So my suggestion to the chairwoman procedurally would be to make a motion. If it's a motion that carries to grant a license, we can then immediately after that discuss each of the conditions.
I vote to grant the license.
Is there a second?
With condition that we're going to discuss now, right?
Correct.
Okay. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Right, seeing none of,
Can I abstain? I'm not sure what the discussion will about the Boston Business Improvement District piece. So can I abstain on that piece? Or yeah, I'm not sure what that's the question I have is on the Boston Business Improvement District piece.
Okay.
So is that
What,
okay? I'm going to just abstain.
through that piece, and then we can have another motion.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
This is new. This is new to me as well. So in terms of the suggested conditions by the bid, the first is that Patriot Care will operate adult use only by appointment until, and I want to make clear, and the bid has made clear, these conditions are for the recreational piece only, not to apply to the medical piece. So the first condition that the applicant has agreed to is appointment only for 6 months, for the first 6 months. Are there any issues with that?
Question. If by chance, after the 6 months goes by and we see that without the appointment process, it starts to cause congregation or you know, loitering, what is our recourse after that?
That would be a hearing in front of this board as the regulatory authority, and additional conditions could be placed on the license subsequently.
Okay, thank you.
So condition 1 would be applied. Conditions 2 and 3 are the conditions that each commissioner receive correspondence from Patriot Care regarding their objections. Commissioner 2 is a request to not sell pre-rolled cannabis products. Do any of the commissioners have concerns about placing that condition on the license?
I don't.
I don't have a concern, but like the applicant noted, that would have to be a condition that is implemented in that region for any future applicants.
And that could certainly be, yeah, could certainly be noted for future applicants.
Yeah.
Condition 3 is that Patriot Care will require a minimum purchase amount of $35. Do any of the commissioners have an issue with placing that on the license?
Can
No.
you do that legally?
Yes.
Mhm.
Then, okay.
Can I ask another question?
Of course.
Would no, never mind. I figured it out myself.
Condition 4 would be to insert an educational card. There are no objections to that. Do any of the commissioners have an objection to that being placed on the license?
No.
No.
5 is a triple ID check. Are there any concerns with placing that on the license?
No.
6 are the hours of operation, 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Are there any concerns with placing that on the license?
No.
No.
7 states that Patriot Care will create a crowd and security plan that must be approved by the Boston Police Department in the bid. As part of the requirements for the issuance of a license by this board, there must be an approved security and operations plan. I would advise the board that placing this condition on the license would be inappropriate because it would take away the board's discretion to work with the Boston Police Department and approve such a plan. Are there any objections to not placing this condition on the license?
Nope.
Condition 8 is that the Patriot Care will notify the bid as to the naming and contact information for the dispensary manager and will update this information should the management change staff. Are there any concerns with placing that on the license? Item 9, Patriot Care will not announce, advertise, or promote using text or images any products for sale in the store, on the exterior of the building, including in the windows. Again, I would say that that is the role of the Cannabis Control Commission, who very strictly regulates that requirement. And as such, we should defer to their rules and regulations. Is there any objection with not placing that on the license?
No.
Item 10 is that the bid will not oppose Patriots Care request for new exterior signage. That is an agreement between the bid and Patriot Care, and it is not appropriate to be placed on the license. 11 is Patriot Care agrees to not seek an additional license for on-site consumption or delivery at the location. Again, that is something that would be at the discretion of the board and would require a hearing before the board. So I would say that that is not something that's appropriate to place on the license. And 12 is any changes to these conditions must be agreed to and approved by the downtown bid and the Boston Police Department. Again, while we obviously strongly encourage all licensees to work with the community, any changes would be at the discretion of this board. So I would advise not to place that on the license. So with that, Chairwoman Joyce, is there a secondary motion for the grant of this license with the conditions as just discussed?
Yes, I make a motion to grant the license with the conditions as just discussed.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Commissioner Lombos, I'm sorry, since I can't see you, are you abstaining or did you vote in favor?
Based on the application, I would just, we're getting updates and getting reviews annually on all these things. Again, I would just stress with Commissioner Sanguian that we get an update on D&I and those goals and employment as well on this one.
Okay, and so employment, D&I goals, and you are then voting in favor?
In favor.
Thank you. And our final item on the agenda is based on a number of significant amount of testimony that we've heard, and also as we're learning about this emerging industry. One of the important points of the City Council's ordinance that I believe was part of their intent were for these licenses not to be transferable, in that someone could not come in, state that they're an equity applicant or a local applicant, and then sell this license on the open market. However, it's been brought to the board's attention and my attention as the executive secretary that in large part due to the fact that this is still not federally legal, you cannot obtain bank loans. So once a lot of these licensees, especially equity applicants, obtain a license and a host community agreement, that is when they do their funds. And in order to raise funds in certain situations, they do need to provide beneficial interest to those individuals, even if it's just a very small percentage. Additionally, and from a practical point, having an entirely non-transferable license, and we've seen these challenges on the liquor licensing side, is impractical because sometimes people pass away, sometimes people no longer want to be part of the business. So I would request as the executive secretary that the chairwoman make a motion to allow me to draft language for the board to review regarding transferability. And of course, any transferability, first and foremost, could not impact equity in any way in terms of our equity applicants. And secondly, any change to the license would require a hearing before this board and the approval of this board.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, I will draft that language. Thank you all. Thank all the commissioners and the chairwoman for all of their hard work. I know that 9 applications was a lot, and that you all spent hours, in addition to the hours and hours in the hearing, you spent hours and hours poring over the materials. Thank you to all the applicants and their teams for all the supplemental information you provided, and all the community groups for weighing in. And we look forward to seeing you all at our next hearing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.